So the scenario is that control have received a call to a distressed dog in a car. It's a very hot day and the car is located in an outdoor city centre car park. Staff and an agitated crowd have gathered and they want to smash the window but have no means to do so. A spaniel was lying on the rear seat of the car, looks to be suffering and has no access to water or fresh air. The caller has said the dog has been there for at least 40 minutes. Now, this incident in your service may be considered a fire and rescue incident type and therefore control may automatically mobilise. Alternatively, they may inform the police or the RSPCA to establish whether they can deal with the situation. But in this scenario, the RSPCA cannot confirm attendance for at least an hour and police are requesting the fire and rescue service attend for possible forced entry. Control should mobilise accordingly based on the information acquired through the 10 steps to situational awareness. In terms of species, I think it's clear that we're looking at a domestic animal. There's one in number and the likelihood is that this is a companion or somebody's pet. Thinking about the situation, it's clear that there's a direct animal life risk. There's also a potential indirect human injury risk through members of the public taking actions into their own hands and placing themselves at danger through trying to smash the glass, for instance. I think we need to consider societal responsibility here, responsibilities under the Animal Welfare Act, a duty of care, and effectively this would be what we used to consider rendering humanitarian services. We also need to consider, if sending people to this incident, whether the situation falls within the capabilities of the fire and rescue service. Breaking into a car, for instance, I think would clearly sit within our capabilities. Environmental factors can play a huge part in these assessments. In this situation, it's relatively straightforward. The animal's in an enclosed space, it's in transit, in this case a road scenario. The animal is loose but contained within that structure or that enclosed space. The important factor here is the context, the fact that we've got very hot environmental conditions, and that is the factor that's going to cause the suffering and potentially lead to the animal's death. One of the most important factors to consider at any incident is the people that are around the situation. In this case, there's no owner available. Now, the owner being the responsible person for that animal under the animal welfare law. There are members of the public, some are agitated, some may be attempting to locate the owner. There's a crowd that are likely to attempt to break into the car at some point if no action is seen to be taken. There could be quite an explosive reaction if the owner appears. There's a huge emotional impact of this situation. Social media may play a part here, so it's really important that it's dealt with professionally. As with any incident, we need to think about the task. What are we actually expected to do or to undertake? And I suppose the first thing is the imperative to rescue the dog to alleviate suffering. Following that, we may need to provide some pre-veterinary immediate emergency care. We may need to call the dog, provide oxygen therapy, for instance. And during this process, we need to manage the risk. There's a risk of physical injury to the responders. There's also a risk that the animal may escape in the process, which would be our responsibility. Talking about responsibility, of course, we now have temporary responsibility for that animal in the absence of the owner under animal welfare law. So therefore we need to think about post-incident recovery, think about the containment or the restraint of that animal in that process, and how we would transport it to receive definitive veterinary care. And I think it's worth pointing out that throughout this, it's worth recording our actions, recording the state of the animal on mobile phone, for instance, prior to taking action, in case we need to subsequently refer to notes or to our actions if there are any questions to be answered. In considering additional animal risks, clearly this is a companion animal, a pet. Breed characteristics wouldn't suggest that it was a highly dangerous animal, and therefore the level of risk would be relatively low. But also remember that heat-induced stress may lead to potential aggression. Animal risks to the animal would be that if this situation was allowed to continue, the animal would be at risk of dying. We're going to move into the planning stage. We've gathered information. There may be further information that we can gather through other specialists, but in this case I think it's fairly straightforward that if we were to take no action at this stage, the dog is likely to die, there's likely to be a risk to people, the Animal Welfare Act may be deemed to have been breached through allowing unnecessary suffering to continue, and there was also likely to be kind of high social media aspect to this incident, potential conflict at the scene. So I think any plan would really require us to effect entry, to remove the dog safely, provide some form of restraint, and to render pre-veterinary immediate emergency care. Need to have considerations for the animal risk, the fact that we would have temporary responsibility for that animal's welfare, and what we would put in place for post-incident veterinary care, transportation, and ultimately instant handover. Think about PPE. What are the tasks we're engaged in? Well, we're going to be breaking into a vehicle and we have the potential for aggression or bites from the animal, and limited bite protection would be provided by our default PPE, in this case full fire kit. In terms of equipment, we would need to think about restraint and handling and control equipment. This may be improvised or it may be purpose made. And we need to think about what we would consider a safe containment option post-rescue. So thinking about skill sets then, who would be appropriate to deal with this incident? Given the nature of the animal, the tasks, and for the fire and rescue service a fairly routine environmental hazard, I would assess this as being within the capabilities of an initial trained crew, i.e. crews that have received situational awareness and a bit of instruction on dealing with animals in these low-level incident types. Finally, taking action. If we were to establish an offensive mode, we might want to consider also the police for cordon control, crowd management, and we need to factor in that there may possibly be an Animal Welfare Act breach due to negligence on behalf of the owner. So we would want to have that support at the incident for what happens subsequently. The justification for our actions would be a welfare-centred plan within the capabilities of an initial qualified crew.